welcome everyone. Pleasure to have you join us this afternoon. We are going to run a session. We were thinking around 45 minutes, but we'll see how the question comes because we can actually stay probably an hour on this webinar. So 45 minutes, 60 minutes, focused on strategies for growth, shaping the right board. Interesting enough, conversation I've had with many of my startups trying to work out how to identify the right people to join them, but also to achieve the right outcome, which it's about raising money or actually acquiring new customers and growing their businesses. So I'm really, really pleased to welcome this afternoon Ben Johnson, Gail Pritchard, Chris Hornby on this wonderful webinar. And I will just start with asking all three, Ben, Gail, and Chris, to introduce themselves. So I'll start with Ben. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you. Thank you for having us today. So I'm Ben Johnson. I lead the insurance practice at Sheffield Haworth. My background has been in insurance, search, interim advisory and consulting for about 15 years now, predominantly in personal lines, but also in the life market as well. And that's across the UK, Europe and wider sort of thing. My background really grew up in the change and transformation space. That's where I kind of cut my teeth. That's where I kind of learnt my trade and my skill as such. But that's been cross-functional, so much more of a generalist approach to insurance overall, but always in insurance. So that's me.
Welcome. Gail.
Thank you.
Hi, really nice to join you today. My name is Gail Pritchard. I work with Ben in the insurance practice of Sheffield Haworth. My background is in insurance. Originally worked for AXA and Aegon. Worked entirely the whole length of my career so far internationally in Asia Pacific, Europe, and the US. I work on executive search in the insurance sector, but also on the softer aspect of leadership assessment and coaching.
Welcome. Chris.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Chris Hornby. I work for Gillimore Stevens. We are essentially the technology and digital arm of Sheffield Haworth. So I complement my partners in APAC and the US. I look after digital software technology businesses headquartered in Europe. So it's everything from smaller perhaps seed stage businesses right through to your $500 million private equity-backed technology clients. So just to clarify, my lens is purely through technology startup, not insurance.
Welcome very much, Chris. So Ben, I'll start with you.
Yes.
And thank you very much for spending some time with some of my portfolio startups. And it would be great if we could start with you telling us about the conclusion you were able to draw from the previous conversation we've had with them. What are the main challenges right now?
Okay, so I think we spoke to about 8 startups in total, actually, just to get a feeling for what their main challenges were. But actually, since then, Gail and I, and of course, Chris, have been talking to a lot more of these businesses as well. So it's quite a large pool of businesses that we spoke to. There's a main overarching challenge, most certainly, which is acceleration of growth. Access to the market, sales, revenue, bringing in money quicker so you can continue doing what you're doing. It's a standard business challenge for any startup. It doesn't have to be insurtech, something tech, anything, any startup. It's your cash flow and getting money into your business quicker. But there were kind of 3 main kind of pillars that we felt to this overarching challenge, which were there was a limited experience of actually hiring people into a business or indeed building a business itself. A lot of these companies have a very, very good understanding of what they want their technology to look like and indeed what they want their product to do. They don't necessarily have the experience of employing people or the experience of understanding how you can do that. There was a limited access to the actual insurance market itself. So a lot of the companies that we're speaking to really came up and grew up in the tech space as opposed to the insurance market. So understood, again, the tech challenges they wanted to address, what they wanted the technology to do, how to build technology teams, but didn't necessarily have the access to the insurance industry. And if they did, they were struggling to get access to the individuals they needed to at the right level. So when they were having conversations with insurance companies, or indeed they had their network that they were turning to, they probably were 1 or 2 rungs lower than they needed to be, which meant effectively a lot of the conversations that they were having with the businesses that they want to speak to were not where they needed to be. They weren't necessarily with the decision maker, and the decision maker, when they got the interaction with them, was pushing them back 1 or 2 levels lower, which effectively means they weren't, again, having the conversations they needed to. So there were the kind of 3 main challenges we saw, but overarching, it was all about increasing revenue as quickly as they possibly could. Actually selling the product. A lot of the time, the companies loved what they were doing, thought it was fantastic, but they weren't quite ready to sign on the dotted line.
And so when you start looking at this still with you, Ben, what do you think are the type of skill set is required to start addressing some of those growth challenges?
What sort of skill sets? I mean, I think if we look at the skill set overall, I think there's got to be a combination of the hard skills and the soft skills. Okay, and that's really, really important. Okay, and what I mean by that is, there's the soft skills, the passion, the tenacity, the drive is really, really important. Okay, but then there's the hard skills of actual hardcore experience. And again, it's that balance of when we build an advisory board, which is a lot of what we're talking about here today, not just the exec, but also the advisory board as well, of making sure you do have the insurance presence on that board. Okay, and again, if you look at the product you're building, who do you think are going to be your customers within that insurance company? Is it data focused? Is it claims focused? Is it going to look at the underwriting function and making sure that the advisors that you start to bring into that business are the right individuals to be able to access those businesses? So if you are building a product, it sounds really, really obvious, but if you are building a product that is going to reduce cost in the claims function, please do make sure that you have a really, really significant chief claims officer on your board, that you've got access to those individuals, because they're the ones who can really accelerate your growth and get you those conversations so much quicker. What we also found was that, I think, how can I put this? The way you bring those people into the business is also really important as well, because there's going to be a short, medium and long term. Okay. And what skills that you need in the short term might not be the skills that you need 12, 24, 36 months down the line. So we thought it was really important that actually you needed a much more agile, flexible model that would support your growth through that time. So instead of bringing everybody into your business on a permanent basis, at the beginning, you need a flexible model that will allow you to bring in somebody who can help you build your initial business model. Then actually you might find that you need different people in the future. So don't bring in a permanent CFO just from the offset. Why don't you bring in somebody 1 or 2 days a week? Why don't you have a flexible model where you can get some support and some advice, but you don't start to or basically you're not spending too much of your cash at the very beginning on very expensive resources that you may not need in the medium to long term. I also think there's a case as well, actually, for on the flip side of that, bringing in really, really heavyweights at the very beginning of the process. So, for instance, marketing. You can't bring in a really big CMO from the offset. It would cost you a lot of money. So there's the idea that actually, you can bring in an interim CMO or something on a project basis to really help you kickstart your marketing. But then actually you don't necessarily need them after 2 or 3 months. So I think it's really important not only to have the combination of soft and hard skills, but also to make sure that you are addressing the fact that you won't need all of these people in 6 to 12 months' time. So the kind of interim, advisory and permanent models need to blend together to help you through that process. So I think those sort of things are very important. Yeah.
Thank you. Before answering the questions that are coming through, Gail, what should I expect from an NED in terms of their contribution to the board? And how do I go about finding the right ones?
Well, a non-executive director is here, is going to be useful for you as an advisor. I don't know if you would like me to give you a bit of a difference between,
absolutely.
Let's differentiate 4 different things. Let's go from the shareholder to the director, the non-executive director, and the advisor. The shareholder owns the company. The director manages the company. So a shareholder doesn't necessarily have the right to be a director, and the director doesn't have necessarily to be a shareholder. Okay, and then you have the non-executive director, more specifically the independent non-executive director. They will come on board and be an advisor to the business. They will not do. They will provide an independent overview, for instance, of your strategy. They will bring their outside experience. And actually, going back to what Ben was saying, that's actually a very important point, because you need to be focusing on what it is you need on your board, potentially, as something complementary to the skills and experience that you already have. They will bring their network. They will act as an ambassador to your business, and they will also look at 2 things: planning the succession, within the board, but they are often used as the one who help making the tough decisions. and taking the difficult steps in the business because they are independent. If you pick your non-executive directors well, they could be incredibly useful to you, especially. In principle, a non-executive director doesn't have to be paid. It is your choice as to whether you want to do that or not. It is important to know that the practice depends on the industry you're in. If you look at a charity or public sector, quite often it's pro bono. But if you look at financial services, most of the time it is paid. The fees depend on what you're prepared to pay. They can vary from 15,000, 20,000 pounds a year to up to 70,000, 80,000 pounds a year for a pure non-executive director. This changes if you become a deputy chair or a chair, or if you are also on a committee. That's for larger organizations, obviously. So it is a role that is very important, but what you have to keep in mind as well is that the main difference there are two main differences between a independent non-executive director and an advisor. One, a non-executive director is legally responsible in the same way a director would be. And two, they cast a vote. They are part of the board. Whereas an advisor, they will not have the same level of responsibility. Sometimes, in some instances, they can become shadow directors, and there is still a responsibility. However, not the same way as a non-executive director. And you pay them. And they can be overall perhaps more expensive than using a non-executive director. So there are pros and cons in both instances. But in terms of the experience they can bring and the network, it's very similar.
Actually, Gail, Tahir sent us a question. I wondered whether you would want to address that question, which is around how do you engage the board versus the advisory board roles and responsibility? What should be the frequency of contact, for instance?
For non-executive directors, the practice is usually 1 to 2 days a month. And so you spread it the way you want. But actually, I like you looking at it from an overall yearly perspective. Things are changing. Non-executive directors are used more and more. And in our sector, insurance, it's mainly due to the regulator. So when I started doing what I do, you would think, one day every 2 months. Now it's at least 2 days a month. And actually, usually I say 30 days a year. So, it also depends on your relationship with the non-executive director. It comes from the culture of the company and the willingness of the non-executive director. Some companies like using the non-executive directors a lot and inviting them even to social events and, so that there is a soft feel to it. And some non-executive directors are very happy to oblige. Some are a little bit more, in the background. But you should feel free, to some extent, to be communicative with your non-executive directors and use them as much as you want, as long as you agree with them that it is an amount of work or of contact that they are comfortable with. Usually you agree that upfront when you set up, the relationship. Very often you have a contract and you actually say how many hours or days a month you expect to be. Advisors, well, I think the difference is it's more commercial. So you will have a set as well and you pay, of course, depending on how much you use them usually. And Ben will tell me maybe if I'm wrong here, but you're going to pay, a daily rate and so it's a slightly different approach.
Just a little bit more actually there. Sure. Gail's absolutely spot on, of course. The advantage, I suppose, of an advisor is that you can bring them in as in an advisory capacity to, used to be, say, 1 day per month or whatever it might be, very similar to a non-exec director, but you can draw upon them as and when you need with regards to skills. Now, they, of course, can act as an ambassador for you within the market. That's their day-to-day role, to introduce you, etc. That's part of that role. But then you say you've got again, they're from the claims background and you've got a claims project and you need some deep knowledge for a period of 4 to 6 weeks, whatever it might be. You can then have a discussion with them about pulling them in on that project if they have the bandwidth and the capability and capacity to do that. So you get the ability to draw upon that resource like you would with an interim for a particular period of time. Now, you may be paying them one rate for the advisory role, but if you want to pull them in to help you deliver a project, you can then discuss a different sort of rate for them as well. So it has that flexibility. Whereas with a formal non-exec director, I think that would be maybe a little bit more difficult sort of thing. With the advisory roles, there's a lot more flexibility because, as I say, you're paying them on a daily rate basis.
Well, the bottom line is that a non-executive director can't get too involved.
Yeah.
And so...
Yeah, to have that external,
yes.
component view.
The main thing is independent. Yeah. So they're here to provide a view. I mean, I always say when I interview non-executive directors how it was, their first experience as a non-executive director, the most difficult part is that for them, to have come from being an executive to a non-executive and learn how to ask questions as opposed to doing.
Yeah, interesting. Chris, you're working with a lot of disruptive tech ventures, right? And so from your knowledge, expertise, what you've learned working with them, when you look at the people and talent perspective, what are the main challenges you see successful CEOs overcome in early stage businesses?
Yeah, so I think one of the things we see successful CEOs is they've aligned business strategy to talent strategy very early on. And often really early stage businesses will come to us with a requirement. They'll say, we want this, we want that. And we go, okay, that's great. And it's almost kind of reactive. I don't mean that they don't understand that they need a commercial operations, but what they've not done is reflected on who's actually on the team, what the hard skills are, what the soft skills are, whether they've created already that diversity of thought that's going to give them kind of innovative new ideas. Typically, when we start our businesses as well, we often hire from our own network. So there's a good chance that you might well be hiring people who are quite similar to you or perhaps your friends. Mm-hmm. So the successful CEOs, what they've done is, okay, let's take a bit of a backstop and let's have a look at who's in my organization. Where's my organization going to need to go in 3 years? What skills do I need? Have I got them? Can I upskill the people I've already got? Can I train them? What do I need more of? What do I need less of? And that's probably one of the key parts to come from a people talent perspective that we don't see. And interestingly, off the back of COVID, I think there's been a kind of an extra appreciation for the role of the people officer, the HRD, the chief of staff, whatever we're calling it nowadays. Because those businesses that have actually had that people focus, someone focused on people in the organisation early on, have survived and gone through this a little bit better. And I think now what we might see is people investing more in people, the people function a bit early on, because for better or worse, the HR, the people function is always the last to be invested in a tech scale-up. And I think that'll change. And what we might see is people focused on talent strategy in conjunction with business strategy earlier on in their life cycle.
So I guess both Chris, Ben, I think there's another question from Tahir here, which is about validating the NED commentary we just heard. So Tahir is highlighting, yes, it is true theoretically that, the role of the advisor versus the NED. But as a startup, we need NEDs to be independent, but equally become deeply involved, such that shaping business model strategy, growth, funding, culture, all of the above as we build our business. So perhaps NEDs for startups are building companies versus NEDs for PLC are maintenance. Do the role differ? Should they differ? ?
Wow. Okay. Do the roles differ between a non-exec director and an advisor? Is that what we're asking here, or? No. Sorry.
So it's more around the NED roles within the NED roles within startups and the NED roles within a big company.
Fundamentally, no.
Yeah.
That's the quick corporate governance answer. Because at the end of the day, a non-executive director is here, an independent non-executive director is here to see that things are done properly, that the strategy is being implemented as was supposed to be, that strategy makes sense, actually, from the beginning. I mean, it depends on organizations when there is but for a smaller setup. So I don't think that a non-executive director's role should differ depending on the size of the organization. What I think, however, is that you have to be very careful as to what you use quickly in the setup of your startup. It feels to me, and I think we had that discussion back before, an advisor may be a better option because you're going to have more flexibility around what they can do or not do than a non-executive director. So it's the balance that you need to find. But per se, no, they shouldn't really.
If actually I could give you a live example, actually, of course, I mean, Gail's, again, absolutely spot on, of course, that is the situation. Actually, Chris and I were working on a project with a tech firm where they asked us to come in and look at bringing in a non-exec director for their business to look at the insurtech possibilities of this. They didn't need a non-exec director at that point in time. What they needed was advisory. Now, what we got them was somebody who could help them understand the product, test the product, understand if it was right and appropriate for the market, look at a business case to go-to-market strategy. But then because we wanted that individual to be in the business, we could move them into a non-exec director role should that work out. So that was kind of a blended approach to that. So yes, we got them into the initial advisory work, but then they could become a non-exec director later on. But absolutely. I mean, non-exec directors in startups might get a little bit more involved because they're closer to it. There's fewer of them. That could be the nature of the beast. But absolutely, as Gail says, that's not it from a governance perspective. No.
I think from what I've seen and from the role I've taken is that what we need to always be careful of as NEDs is not become shadow directors.
Exactly.
Right? And I've seen that happen.
Absolutely.
Where actually the team became completely swallowed up and unable to perform because the NED were the investors, their shareholders, and they were actually so scared of losing the investment money they had made in that company that literally they destroyed the venture. Yeah. And I've seen that happen. So I think we all need to be mindful that we need to help a business grow. And any action or reaction we have, it's always to look at the how we can help this business make the best choices and the leaders of those businesses make their own choices and actually be clear around how they do that without overwhelming them. One thing which actually came through as well, and maybe this question is for you, Gail, is how common is for an NED or an advisor to be a shareholder? Is there an optimal number of percentage balance in a startup between NED, director, and shareholders?
I work mostly with non-startup. Okay, so I need to be very clear about that up front. But there is no direct link in my world between being a shareholder and being an independent non-executive director. Okay, you could be, but you don't have to be, and most of the time they're not actually, because boards change and evolve, and we very much we come into play when an organization needs a new non-executive director. So we go out in the market and we find someone who is right for the board and with no necessarily a previous link with the business. The balance, and I'm talking here just in terms of people, not in shareholding or it's up to you. But it is recommended not to have too many of either. So you don't. I see boards sometimes where you have 6 directors and 2 non-executive directors, and the other way around as well. By the way, it doesn't work. It's not the right balance. So it's up to you. But usually having a an equal number, especially when you're small, would work best, regardless again of the shareholding or that kind.
Yeah, I can see that. So, for example, directors, you have 3 directors, and usually when I work with my startup, usually they tend to come in 3, right? You have the CEO, you have the CTO, so the tech person, and you may have the chief product officer, chief marketing officer, the 3. And then they may match that, from the mentor pool, another 3, to help them either from advice to start with, or then take them into an AD. So usually you have 3 to 3. Now, as you said, shareholders are people who have equity in the business, and having equity in many insurance startups, I would say it depends. When they raise money, may have multiple shareholders. They may actually have 10 shareholders. I've seen startups with 20 shareholders, and that becomes a problem actually, because when they raise the Series A, they need to shrink that down to potentially 5 shareholders, which are the investors, the owners, the one who are actually providing the equity to the business. So all these need to be always thought through carefully.
Yes, absolutely. You need some balance, because otherwise you can't forget what the ultimate reason is for the non-executive directors to be there as well. You don't want too many, but you want enough so that they can genuinely cast an eye on what's happening within the business. But if you have 7 of them on the board and 3 executive directors, the balance is wrong. There's going to be too many questions asked, basically.
And not enough time to answer.
And not enough time to answer. Yeah.
So let me ask you another question, actually, Gail, because we have questions coming in. So I just want to balance the answer, because some of the answer may come from some of the things we wanted to talk about, which is, how do I ensure that my board members are complementary in terms of behaviors and style and risk profile? How do we bring diversity of thoughts within the board? How do we ensure that it works well? And how do we, balance the diversity with inclusion, right? We are all talking about diversity, but what about the inclusion part? What's your view?
My view goes back to what Chris was saying earlier, actually. It starts from the beginning. Right at the beginning, when the founders get together, or there is one founder, and you need to think already about your talent. Now, moving forward, the culture you want to create for your organization. And actually, you talked about diversity and inclusion here. That is key to move forward, to attract the right people. There are various ways when you put a team together at recruitment level, or even a bit later, when you have a board, to ensure that your board is complementary. You look at the hardcore technical experience, but you also look at the DNA of these individuals. You look at how well they can work together. And there are tools that you can use to assess that when you recruit them. So, of course, it depends on how you recruit them. You could do it yourself, but I doubt many people are able to use all these tools anyway. You're busy with a lot of other things. So you can use services of different types, but who are going to come and help you make sure that you have a board that can work effectively together. And I'm talking about both the executive and the non-executive directors, by the way. It is the same. I'm thinking about which point I go to, but let's say you look at 1 or 2 years down the line, or maybe 2 years too far, but even 1 year down the line, if you start having issues potentially in the way people work together, not well, or don't interact well, don't communicate well, you can do something about it too. And using very similar tools originally, but then you can put processes in place or initiatives in place so that you work better together. It's not really only about the technical expertise that you bring. It's how well do you work together? What kind of profile do you bring? What kind of risk profile do you bring to a board, if, for example? Diversity and diversity of thought, again, I think it really comes from the beginning. What is going to be your approach, really? Are you going to encourage this? And well, again, it depends on the people you surround yourself with. It's the first couple people you're going to bring to the team. are going to be key, because you need to ensure that they have a similar way to yours at looking at what diversity of thought means for the organization. It is a process that starts right from the beginning, and that is why in some instances in the market there are issues, because this has not been the case, okay? And it is now very set in stone. It's quite difficult to change down the line. It's better to do it from the beginning. When you recruit, you can look, again, when you look at the DNA of someone, you can see whether they will be the right addition to your team from that perspective, if they will bring that type of values to your organization or type of motivation.
Can I just add as well, historically we've only had this kind of diagnosis of management team, this kind of due diligence on people from the larger businesses. The private equity are great for it. It's only recently, I think, that we've seen a lot of the ventures kind of take stock of exactly what we've got here. And certainly we're finding, Gillimore and Sheffield Haworth, we're working a lot more with VCs on executive assessment and leadership coaching, and trying to get a more fit for purpose executive team at an earlier stage.
Yeah, and that's very important what you just said, Chris. It's not to hesitate to use tools such as coaching, mentoring, and it's not that easy to go into this type of new ventures. Because sometimes people come from years of experience, and that's great because they're going to be very useful to the business, but they may need an extra support to operate well.
Yeah. Fascinating. I have a quick question actually from Lara here for you guys. So from a startup viewpoint, there are, which are at the earliest stage and you cannot afford to pay the rate for an advisory board. What would be then be expected to be paid though in a pool of equity? Interesting, the exchange.
Chris, have you got any ideas on this, the equity?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I probably wouldn't be giving away equity at such an early stage if it's my first advisor. I think that's probably not wise unless there's a certain circumstance. I'm on the advisory board for 2 companies that are very early stage, and I get paid purely in shares, which vest every 6 months. So I think that's probably one of the ways you might appeal. The trick, of course, is making sure your business is interesting, appealing and exciting, and selling it to the right advisor who's going to go, actually, I'm going to get a bit of a kick and enjoyment about working with your brand. I can see the technology, I can see the market potential, and then rewarding them with shares. That's how it's worked for me, and probably one of the other few ways you're going to do it without paying.
Yeah. And, it's always a journey. I mean, remembering my time and the 200 wonderful mentors we had on the programs, a lot of them would actually dedicate time, effort, hours to actually help the business, shape a sustainable business model. And when, they got their first funding, then they would become an advisor, a proper advisor. So there is always a path towards those things, and providing shares or an equity is definitely a way to do that. And another question from Christy. Is there a typical motivation or mechanism for attracting talented NEDs or advisors outside payment? Really linked to Lara's question. You already mentioned some, Chris. Have an exciting proposition, have an exciting vision. I think would probably be two big things around how you get talented NED to be interested in a specific proposition. Are there any others we should be considering?
No, it's really, I think based on the work I've done in the past, NEDs like, and it would be the case, I guess, with a startup, but they like to be there from the beginning. They like to be involved at strategy point, when the strategy is being designed and built, and the plans made moving forward. They like because they feel that they are closer to the business and they have a bigger impact. Again, they're not going to design the strategy, but they're going to be here to say, are you sure about that? Have you thought about that, based on their own experience? Just coming in and just dealing with implementation from a non-executive director point of view, in many instances is not greatly interesting. Let's put it this way. So that's what I would say. But also it is going to depend on the personality, because you need someone who is obviously an entrepreneur at heart and have that type of profile, and then you're already in a good place with them.
Yeah, I think actually just adding on to that, one of the things I think is really important is be yourself. I think that's really, really important when you want to attract people to your business, is allow some of your personality to come through. Do be who you actually are, because I don't think, when you want to attract people to this very small business, which is a startup and it's just a couple of people in a room, your own personality, bringing your true self to the table, it sounds really fluffy, but it's incredibly important. People want to know who they're going to be working with day to day, who they're going to make this thing happen with. And if you're going to try to be somebody else or something else, it doesn't sit comfortably, it doesn't sit well. So do bring yourself, do be who you really are. And I think really understanding who you are and how you're different as well. What is your product? You've got to understand your mission statement. You've got to understand what you're all about, and you've got to understand how you're going to be different to the competition, what separates you from others. And I think that will also attract people as well when you have a very clearly defined product proposition and you understand why it is different or why it is special, why it's interesting. Make sure you have that understanding yourself before you go to find other people to get on board with it as well.
But then, what do you think are the most important factors actually to consider when building your business altogether? What are your criteria?
What are my criteria when I build? I suppose there's two. One of them is collaboration. I think it's incredibly important to be able to collaborate with people and indeed make sure that you have that network of individuals to collaborate with. If you don't have them, then I think you need to find people who can help you access them. So for instance, as we were talking about earlier on, if it's the insurance individuals you're struggling to get hold of, find people who can help you access that insurance industry, whether it's people like us or indeed it's networking events like the Insurance Supper Club, etc. There are lots of events out there that will allow you to get access to those individuals as well. So collaboration is key. Insurers are partnering more and more with InsurTech than they ever have done before. They understand it is an important part of what they do. They understand that their future depends on interesting InsurTech startups. They are open to those conversations more than they ever were before, but it's still insurance. It is still an industry that is ripe for change, but needs change a lot. And it's an industry that hasn't changed a lot in the past. So do bear with it. It's not going to be easy, okay? These changes are not something that we have experienced. I mean, I've been working it 15 years. Gail's been working it longer than myself. And we have seen more change in something like the Lloyd's market over the last 3 months than I have seen in the last 15 years. I'm not even joking. So do bear with them, okay? That's why the tenacity is so key. But building up your network, collaborating with people is very important. The other thing that is important, and I think is really important, and is not fluffy, it is a strategy, is culture. And it comes back to what we were talking about earlier on. Don't let the culture of your business take care of itself. Don't allow it just to happen. And effectively, if you're the startup, if you're the CEO of this business, it starts with you. So make sure you decide what the culture of business wants to be. Do you want it to be a nice, warm, fluffy environment? Do you want it to be something where people are, work under their own steam and decide what they want to do? Or do you want to be the next Goldman Sachs, where actually you work really, really hard and you play really hard, but you get paid really well? You decide what your culture is. There's no right or wrong. Well, there are wrongs, definitely. There's no necessarily right or wrong, but you decide what you want it to be, and then you bring in the people who can support you to do that. But it's important that you take control of that very early on, I think.
Interesting enough, Diego is asking, at what stage a startup should actually create a board? And I think this is an interesting question, because I've seen, some of the venture I've worked with thinking about it much later, right? Not at the outset. So the question is when, and what should be the interaction in the process between the founders and the VCs that have invested? If you can provide some insight for your understanding, maybe Chris.
Yeah, I'll answer that. So, I mean, technically, when you're starting off, you have yourself as one board member, and your board's created day one, really. It's just it evolves and it expands. So I'm not sure about when there's a certain point you go, actually, we're now a board and we're all going to talk amongst ourselves about the growth of the company. I think it's just a maturing process that happens from day one. But definitely your interaction between the VC should be very, very close. So most of my working day is spent with an investor, and we're working with them to help mature and improve the executive team in one way or another. These guys have been through multiple exits, multiple hires. You should be definitely leaning on their expertise, and they should want to help you. So obviously they're there for capital, but they should also be there for support in building your business. And that's really important that you find the right VC, not just with the bank balance, but also that's going to help your business understand, and they'll be able to tell you what you need. So absolutely, if you're early stage business, 100% talk to your venture partner, and make sure you're getting good advice off them, because they'll have good industry experience.
Yeah, but Chris, I want to continue with you actually. What type of quality? What type of quality should we be looking for in our future executive teams? What are the characteristics, maybe value, beliefs, behavior, and then when working from home, how we manage this working from home situation, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's probably a longer answer than we've got time for. But yeah, I mean, we're changing already, aren't we? I think that it's been a weird 2020, and there's going to be more change coming our way as well. So I think we obviously need confident leaders. We need resilient leaders. People are going to adapt quickly to the many changes, and that can maybe manage the stress of teams well. So that perhaps a little bit more. We talk about a compassionate leader now, don't we? Someone that's a little bit more outcome focused, that's maybe more empathetic, caring, and that actually, when you talk about different locations, can create a sense of community across a large geographical region. Now, that's very difficult, because while all that sounds very nice, what you still need to have is control. You need to have control in a non-invasive way. So you need to make sure you understand how your team's performing, how it's coping, but also have that. Give the team that kind of flexibility. So the style of leadership, I think, is going to change to this kind of compassionate, more outcome-focused leader. The leaders that are probably going to be best are the ones that create this kind of community, across different time zones, different countries. And there's multiple ways we can do that. I think intrinsically motivating staff during times of crisis. I think there's now things like gamification technology, keep people engaged. There's so much stuff. But one of the questions I always ask when I'm hiring executives is, how do you manage stress yourself, A, and then B, how do you manage the team stress, and how do you help them cope through it, and how do you keep them motivated? And we need to be challenging leaders on that style of questioning, and finding those leaders that can exercise that, because ultimately they'll then attract the best talent. Come the end of 2020, 2021, by the way, when there's going to be a big talent shift, there's going to be a lot of companies perhaps not make it through this. And there's going to be a lot of very, very good people on the market. So you need to be, as leaders now, ensuring that you're in a position to attract the best talent.
So the last point, which came through from Mario, is there a guide? In this flexible model for shipping the right board, is there a guide to get it done right? Balancing your advisors versus your NED work when you move to a permanent model. When you start looking at startup, moving to scale up, grown ups, Series A, B, C. Do you have not only a magic wand, but the guideline?
A magic guide as such.
A magic guide, yes.
No, I suppose realistically, in some cases, I suppose we are the guide. I mean, the advisors are your guide, really, because I want to stress there's no right or wrong way of doing this. Well, again, there is probably a wrong way, but there's no definite right way on definite lines that you need to follow. Okay, so it's building those or building the relationships with people that you trust and taking their advice on board at the time. This is kind of some sort of road that we think would be a good one to take. That's what we're suggesting, but that doesn't mean you can't veer off that down a different avenue if you so wish, sort of thing. I don't think there's a guide. What do you think, guys? I mean,
no, I don't think there is a guide. You wish.
No magic guide. I'm so sorry.
But
no
I think it goes down to a little bit what I was saying earlier, is not to be afraid to ask questions, and not necessarily about the core, purpose of your business, but how to do things. And when you do have an advisor, when you do have a non-executive director, or when you do use the investment side of things, is to ask. And everyone has an interesting, I'm sure, and relevant experience. And then you build based on what you think is best for you. I think it's and even more so in the way that things are changing so much. I mean, if you look at a more mature business, and yes, there are some some rules maybe that are more applicable to them in terms of how long an ad should be there for, what is the minimum, the maximum, etc., etc. But is it really relevant to know that? I don't think so. I think it is more about what it is you need for your business, and also not hesitate to use. It's going back to the mentoring, in the market. Get close to the right people, even if it's not in a formal way. And that's what Ben and I do. Chris maybe as well, but quite often I play matchmaker in the market, because I meet someone and I realize they're new in insurance and they need some support, and I put them in contact with someone. It's not a formal relationship. It's help.
Yeah, exactly.
And I want to echo Taya's comment around being smart, actually, to find your mentors and your advisors. He was lucky to find people to mentor him for the past 3 years. And I would say that I've seen amazing people out there as well, willing to give their time, because sometimes they are bored and sometimes they just want to find something which is they are passionate about.
Yes.
And so, I want also to echo the fact that, for those looking for maybe an advisor, probably an advisor, I can ping some of my guys as well, who are mentors and facilitators within the bootcamp I used to run, because those guys still want to work with amazing businesses too. So on this note, I would like to say thank you to Gail, Ben, and Chris for their amazing recommendation. Is there anything you guys would like to leave the audience with? The last few words before we close our webinar.
I don't know. Gail.
For me, it's going back to something that I think Chris mentioned, and which is about the fact I find InsurTech fascinating moving forward in that sense, not only from the fact that it adds technology to a sector that desperately needs it, but it's about the fact that it's maybe the way to take things forward from a culture perspective. The various points we made here are, in my opinion, very key. It's pay attention to the culture, because at the end of the day, that is how you will become an employer of choice, and you will be able to attract people. It's not to be underestimated.
Thank you, Gail. Chris?
Yeah, I think a few points maybe that we've gone. One is to work closely with investors. I think that seems to have come. So actually, a lot of the questions here, you should be getting advice off your investment partner, particularly Mario. Your question there about when should I be changing any? There's no one size fits all. It depends on your business. It's impossible for us to say, of course, but actually, your VC should know, your investment partner, if indeed you are funded. I think a few other points, obviously. Being making sure you're assessing and diagnosing your management team, making sure it's fit for purpose, making sure you've got the right people around you is important. Then obviously, if you really are unsure, reach out to advisors. There's lots of good people in technology, certainly in the world. So I'm sure there'll be people who want to talk to you. And indeed, we'll leave it that if you want to reach out to myself and talk about anything that I've covered from a talent or investment perspective, then I'm more than happy to speak.
And last word, Ben? Are you happy with it?
So what would I say? I suppose one of the important things is to build your ecosystem. Now, of course, we talk about this a lot in tech, having an ecosystem, what an ecosystem is, but make sure that you've got the advisors that you can go to, the collaborators. Again, Chris said it, and it sounds cheesy, but pick up the phone to us sometimes. If you're struggling with something and there's a question, you can always pick up the phone. If we've got some time, we can see if we can help or point in the right direction. As we say, we sometimes matchmake. We've got people in the market who are not working, who are happy to have conversations. So make sure you've got your ecosystem. But I think really importantly is decide who you want to be, decide what you want to be known for, and make sure that your culture matches that. I've seen so many really good businesses, not get sold or not get the investment they need, or indeed really big businesses now not be able to get the M&A activity off the ground because the culture of their business is so bad. Do not underestimate how important it is to get that right. And that starts at the very, very beginning, because once you've got that going wrong, it has this kind of, pandemic type effect through your business. And all of a sudden, before you know it, it's very difficult to change. So take control of that from day one.
Thank you all. I want to thank everyone for their questions. I can see Les's last question, which is about advisors and NED. Unless we actually addressed that question earlier, it is actually better in some respect to focus on advisors first before NEDs, because advisors can do sometimes much more than an ADD could do. And so I want to thank everyone for participating to this webinar. I want to thank Ben, Gail, and Chris for participating and give us their advice. So what I'll do next is that I will package this webinar for you and then share it with everyone, as well as the details of all three, Ben, Gail, and Chris. Give me a few days because I need my my marketing person to package that for us, but I'll send it across. And you can also reach out to Gail, Ben, and Chris on LinkedIn if you want to contact them in the meantime. So thank you, and wishing you all a great evening.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.